Hi, and welcome to the 103rd TiddlyWiki Hangout, a developer-focused hangout. It's hosted by me, Jeremy Ruston, and I'm joined today by first from Austria, Mario. Would you like to say hi, introduce yourself, and say something about your world of TiddlyWiki, your place in the world of TiddlyWiki?
Okay, thank you. My name is Mario Pitsch from Austria, near Salzburg. I'm I think a long-time contributor to TiddlyWiki, responsible for the German translation, and creating pull requests here and there, where I think TiddlyWiki can be improved.
And been associated with the project since the very early days.
Yes, right.
Well, it's good to see you here, and we're also joined, I think, for the second time, by Evan, who, Evan, I think you've been around for a while as well in the TiddlyWiki community, but Evan has recently been enjoying a activity, the like of which we haven't seen, which is some of which is prompting this discussion. Would you like to say hello, say something about yourself, where you are, and then go on to your work with TiddlyWiki?
So I'm Evan Balster. I'm a software application and games developer living in Ames, Iowa. I run a small business, and I use TiddlyWiki quite a lot for my own personal note-taking and for task management, story writing and world building, for time tracking, for research and development notes, and really all kinds of things. Basically, I had some time this last month to kind of stop and improve the way I organize myself, and I decided to do that by investing some serious time into improving TiddlyWiki and giving it some features I've wanted to see for many years. And I kind of justified that based on the fact that if I look over my if I look over my old work logs, this is a tool that has been at my side for hundreds and hundreds of hours of work I've done over the course of many years. So I've been able to justify putting some professional level efforts into it. Relevant to those efforts, some of my other projects have given me some experience in compiler and language design, which ties into some of the stuff that we might be discussing today.
Surely so.
So on that note, I suppose I could bring up this outline that I emailed Jeremy. The talking points I'd posted up here for us to potentially cover are the roadmap for the formulas plugin I've been developing, including a pull.
Jeremy, could you show it, or Evan, can you show it so that everyone can see it?
Oh yeah. So let me see. How do I share my screen? It's in here.
It's that green rectangle down that appears on the left-hand side when you.
The venerable green rectangle. All right, here we are. Okay. So here's my base of operations. My formula plugin, let me know if this zooming nonsense works right.
It's okay now,
is essentially a plugin I've made for TiddlyWiki that allows Excel spreadsheet style formulas to be written. So you use a syntax in wiki text with parentheses and equals, and inside that you can write simple mathematical equations, or you can also use TiddlyWiki entities such as transclusions and filters. So if I say in a formula, if I include a transclusion of the value of a soda pop, I get 1.49, which is what I put in that tiddler. But that's a number. I can add things to it, or I can make it an argument to a function, and I can also use filters. In order to produce a bunch of numbers, and then do handy things like summing those. All of the things tagged expenses in this wiki sum up to $18.42. But by the way, I'm properly zoomed in on part of my screen right here, right? I don't know how those things play together.
Yes, that
Cool.
works.
Or average or whatever else. The kind of total set of functionality in the formulas wiki is pretty extensive because I basically just went through a list of functions available in Excel spreadsheets and just implemented bunches and bunches and bunches of them for math, rounding, trigonometry, string processing, logic, comparisons. So, and this is based on a syntax that a lot of people are familiar with, spreadsheet formulas, in which I think plays into a way of sort of programming computations that people don't generally think of as programming, because it's very simple, it's very interactive, and importantly, spreadsheets are another place besides TiddlyWiki where you see this concept of dynamic refresh, where if you change information at its source, any derived information that's based on what you've changed will update in how it's displayed, to reflect the changes in the data set. So I've got a few demos I've made with this, because it's possible to use formulas with other TiddlyWiki entities like SVG elements, and to make things like interactive visuals. It looks like the rendering's a little slower with screen share on. But this is a very simple kind of interactive SVG visual I made here. And under the hood, what's happening is I just have a little bit of SVG code. I have an edit text widget I've tricked into being a slider. And some of these parameters, like the radius of the big circles in the background, are set to formulas using the formula macro, which is one way to use formulas, not the main way actually, and it's something I'm looking to phase out, because I'm actually now developing a dedicated attribute syntax for these, which gets into some of the other stuff oh yeah. Well, there's a good reminder. There are a couple of ways I've found to crash the parser. Let's just give that a refresh. Yeah, I've actually found there's a way closing comments can do the same thing, if they show up in TiddlyWiki markup. But so in wiki text, a formula looks like this. Again, it's just between these little parentheses equals. This is just kind of what I could come up with as far as something that would be unlikely to show.
I loved the term mushroom brackets that you used the first time.
Yeah, no, that's the term. It's a little goofy, but it gets the job done. So, so I've implemented formulas as a widget. Actually, a couple of different widgets, but the mushroom brackets turn into a formula widget. The formula widget evaluates the formula inside, and it makes the result into a string. There's also another widget that sets a bunch of variables, like the VarsWidget. Although potentially with other things I'm talking about, this could end up being redundant with the VarsWidget itself.
I do have a short question. Do you take care about the precisions? Because with the float, we have float in JavaScript. We have a little bit of problems. So you are calculating internally with full resolution, and then you are cutting off the or you're rounding.
So that's a good little item for discussion, Mario. So numbers in JavaScript are kind of a hot mess.
Yeah, I know.
And specifically the way they're formatted to strings is a hot mess and tends to be a little more unhinged than in the standard libraries of other languages. So right now I offer some options when you're formatting, when you're using a formula. Actually, most of these options here, or a good number of them anyway, are concerned with how values in formulas get turned into strings.
Yeah.
Because if a formula yields a date, there are different ways you might want to format that into a string. Hence, there's a date format that works the same way as TiddlyWiki's own date formats, like in the now macro. If you're formatting numbers, currently, I don't know why there are 2 copies of this row. You can set to precision or to fixed to rein in the number of digits that will be displayed. To fixed is useful if you're showing like a dollar value or something with kind of a specific level of significance, because you can say to fixed equals 2, as I do in the main page here. And then all numbers display with 2 decimal points.
I just wanted to know, so but internally you are calculating with the full range, and then when everything is finished and return to a string, and then you start cutting off commas.
Yeah, which does mean if you use like the FormulaVarsWidget, or otherwise if you're storing in strings, in TiddlyWiki variables usually, there can be a loss of precision if you chop off too many decimal places.
Right. Yeah. Okay, but that's always the problem. You have the same, almost the same problem with other software. Yeah, but what I liked very much was that to have the possibility to do calculations like this. Because there is a lot of let's say group discussions where users really want something like this. And you were the first one which really tackled the problem with its own parser. Because many others have just written a JavaScript eval, which is really tricky. Hi, Eric.
Hello, Eric. Do we have someone new on the call?
Is Jeremy still there?
Hi, Eric. I am. Yeah, sorry, I've let Eric in now. So sorry, Eric. I didn't notice you there.
Hey, I'm doing all right. How about you?
Hi. UK, enjoying 2018 so far. Eric, you missed the intros, and you must be the person who's introduced yourself the most on these things. I'd like to say hello and introduce. Muted, Eric.
Yeah, okay. I think I got it this time, right? Yeah. Can you hear me?
How are you doing, Eric? It's good to see you.
Yeah. Is the audio working?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes, it's fine.
I'm Eric Schulman. I'm the author of Tiddly Tools, and I've been involved with TiddlyWiki since 2005. Yeah. It's been a long time.
It is quite a long time.
And Yeah, and I'm here.
Well, it's good to see you here, Eric. Eric's been suffering from poor health recently, so it makes it all the sweeter to see you up and about, Eric.
Well, thank you. It's been a difficult ride over the last 4 months. Actually,
Yeah.
it's since June, actually, but especially the last 4 months. But I'm still alive, so that's something.
Well, Evan was taking us through his formula plugin, and Evan, you made a brilliant line at the beginning, which was that because Wiki all the time, that it was worth the investment in improving it. Loved, and I think, Eric, I'm not sure if you've seen what Evan's done on the groups, but basically it's equivalent to a discussion we've had before, which phrased as, wouldn't it be nice to introduce a new syntax that was completely different, that allowed for conventional postfix expression notation? Is that what it's called? Whatever it's called. Anyway, normal, or in this case, Excel expression.
Yeah.
And Evan's done it with a, in the most interesting manifestation, he's done it as a new attribute quote. So that gives us complete generality of being able to use these formulas anywhere. The formulas can themselves reference TiddlyWiki entities. So we've got a great example here.
Yeah.
So,
parenthetically, this is, we'd reasoned our way previously to the idea that we needed to have a special character at the beginning of a filter to say, I'm a new style filter. In brackets is way better, but there you go. But yes, it's a really exciting development, and as Mario says, it's in the large class of things that anybody who's been knocking around TiddlyWiki for a while will have thought could be possible, but nobody else has done it. So hearty congratulations for being first with something that's so useful. And also I love the way that you've done it by, you pushed out a plugin, you haven't let issues in the core get in the way of getting the plugin out. So you've taken the route to get your ideas in front of a wider audience, and you audience to improve it, and it's terrific to see the process. And of course, now, which is broadly what kind of core changes might help support these types of modifications, is a great discussion to be having as well.
Yeah. And I also think what was funny was to see the communication that's going on in the group, and the users, they are pushing the stuff to the limit, and this was also really funny to see. So that they really use the stuff that you could never expect normally.
yeah.
That's the fun thing which is going on.
Back over to you.
So on that note, I haven't quite gotten to the wildest of my little demos with this yet. I actually, I've got quite a few more to show, but there are a couple more concepts I should probably introduce about how this is put together that are kind of quite philosophically important. So I mentioned earlier how I draw a connection between the way TiddlyWiki works with qualitative information by refreshing the display of information or of derived information whenever a source of information changes. So if I change a field somewhere, anything that could possibly be depending on that field gets visually updated. It's the same way in an Excel or Google Sheets spreadsheet. If you have a row that computes a sum, and then something that takes a percentage of that sum, and then something that does something to that, if you change one of the items in the sum, all of that will change. Mm-hmm. By the same virtue, the formulas plugin, for example, if we're going through the results of this filter to get the value of each thing tagged with an expense, it'll go through that, and if one of the values it encounters is a formula, like this is 10 sodas. It's one of our expenses. And its value is 10 times whatever the value of a soda is. And actually, this little bit of markup was written before before I had an expression parser. So let's write it like that. But and that's just consistency with wiki text, because of course, if we transcluded a piece of wiki text, it would be recursively wikified, just as a piece of formula should be recursively evaluated.
Yeah.
So the strength of making something that can be a tag attribute, as well as this other stuff, like I was saying before, you can make you can make little interactive visuals out of it. These are performing a little less well with screen capture on, but what I'm somewhat more excited about is the idea that I'll go back to my earlier statement that I've been using Imatone for research and development for a long time. You know, I make use of like the LaTeX plugin. And there's a really interesting field of these things called explorable explanations, which are articles with visual interactive models that are used to teach concepts to people. At times, I've built things a little bit like those also just to aid my own understanding of things I'm researching. But I'm very interested in TiddlyWiki as a platform for explorable explanations and also as a platform for building visualized mathematical models. So this is a little demo I made demonstrating a kind of heady math concept in a visual way. Yeah. It's about the real projective line, which takes the entire number line and stitches it into a circle with unsigned infinity as the stitching point on the circle opposite of 0. And it's pretty weird to just look at it like this. So let's have a look real quick at how a point on this circular real projective line turns into a point on the actual number line. Well, as it turns out, we just shoot a ray from infinity through the point on the number line, on the real projective line, and see where it hits the number line. If we go at a 45-degree angle, it'll just be 1. If we go at a lower or higher angle, it'll be a lower or higher number. And there are a couple of very interesting rules this observes, such as if we flip left and right, it goes from positive to negative. If we flip the point vertically, though, a number will alternate between being itself and being its reciprocal. So the vertical mirror image of 2 is 0.5. And basically this honestly is a number system that's not very useful unless you understand some other things, but it was just a kind of an idea about showing this really interesting mathematical principle about what these rays do and what this kind of infinite number space does as a little SVG demo written in TiddlyWiki. And if we go into this, we can see there's a lot of use of my FormulaVarsWidget. It's a bit more complicated than some of the other stuff I've written, but it's nothing too crazy overwhelming considering how much is in there. I've also got some utility macros to help with this guy.
Is this written before mushroom brackets?
What now?
Simple.
Oh, so right now I'm actually using the FormulaVarsWidget, which is something that I made because I hadn't yet made the attribute syntax, and I'm still a little bit cautious about the attribute syntax because it's relying currently on features which are modifications to the core. I do have a pull request up, which will make that kind of a more officially implementable feature, but I wrote most of these demos before I implemented that, and I'm still a little bit cautious, you could say, about relying on a core mod for the things I'm writing.
Sure, okay.
So for right now, this wiki here does support the mushroom bracket attribute syntax, but I do make a lot of even well yeah, I make a lot of use of this sort of temporary measure with the FormulaVarsWidget, which
sure.
Yeah. So
the FormulaVarsWidget looks perfectly usable.
Yeah.
I must say.
It does. It works more or less like the
must
Vars
be
widget, and
something that
it has some.
in this case, because the interdependencies, it must be frustrating that you don't get to control the order that's happening.
Well, actually, right now the FormulaVarsWidget, I had thought about making it so that it evaluates the variables in the order they're supplied, but I couldn't work out a way to do that, and it also seemed like it might be potentially bending some TiddlyWiki rules, or depending on like the order that items enumerate in a hash map, which isn't guaranteed in JavaScript.
Yeah, exactly.
So at this point, if you want to set multiple kind of cascades of variables that depend on one another, you just need to use multiple widgets. One other advantage the FormulaVarsWidget will continue to have over the Vars widget is that you can just control the string formatting for the variables you set in that widget. Yeah, one other quite heavy demo I've been playing with is this thing called Harmonic Lattice, which is a real stress test for
That's a nice one.
performance. And this is it's pretty disastrous, but as it is with the current kind of refreshing rules, because it involves some thousand iterations of it's not so much the math that's being done here, which is quite cheap to evaluate. It's the fact that when you set variables in TiddlyWiki, the convention is to completely refresh everything in the section of wiki code of widgets where the changed variables might affect things. So that actually causes the DOM nodes for all of these SVG elements to be destroyed and recreated, which is substantially more expensive than just recalculating their positions. To see what it would be like without that, I actually implemented this no refresh hack, which in this particular circumstance, the behavior is not changed if the FormulaVarsWidget just doesn't instigate a refresh. I've ascertained that actually, in a lot of cases, that's something that the wiki can tolerate while behaving correctly, and especially if the we'll get into the more into the selective refresh topic later, I suppose. But basically, if I let selective refresh handle this instead of rebuilding this whole DOM, this demo gets to performing a lot better. And it's a bit smoother still than this if I don't have screen capture on. But even with that extra source of lag, you can see there's quite a substantial difference in refresh time. Shut off.
I did test your test project, and without the screen capturing, it's relatively smooth afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you have many points.
But yeah, this is the beginnings of an explorable explanation to talk about harmonic lattices and how these are all simple fractions represented logarithmically, with the logarithm of the fraction on the x-axis and the larger of the two numbers in the fraction on the y-axis. So this is 1 over 1, 2 over 1, 1 over 2, 3 over 1, or 3 over 3, 2 over 3, 1 over 3. And they're also represented against a 12 division grid per octave, where you can actually see that many of these simple fractions fall near the intersections on the grid, which is why we use a 12-note system in music. I work in music technology, so this is stuff I think about a lot. And this will probably be better explained if I turn it into a proper explorable. So if you can believe it, I actually have still more things to show with this, because as I mentioned, I didn't just build this as a curiosity. I built it because I had some very particular applications for it. And the thing I've been doing with this new tool set now is I've built a thing. I built a wiki where I can catalog all the work I've done over the last 2 years, all of which has been recorded into CSV spreadsheets with this time tracking tool that I actually have running right now. I use the Pomodoro technique as part of a working ritual, and it has the effect of tracking where I spend my time. I'm also involved in multiple projects. I spend my time on different tasks within the project. So basically, I have a whole lot of data, and I can show you the raw data here, or part of it, that I have a whole lot of data I've imported into this wiki with the help of my CSV unpacker plugin, yet another plugin I've developed recently. And so I have just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these Pomodoros imported into this wiki, representing thousands of hours of work. And they've got little bits of markup, like these +2s and these bracket 2s, which and then there's just some contextual information which I've had to tag by hand using another little wiki text monstrosity over here. But I've basically gone through all of these, tagged them with which projects I've been working on, which types of work I've been doing. And this has allowed me to make to have a rich data set of all this work I've been doing, which I can visualize in the form of a calendar like this, or on which I can do statistics to figure out which projects I've been sinking the most time into, which types of work I've been doing the most of, et cetera, et cetera. And computing this stuff, at least, like these statistics, is actually pretty simple, because we're just summing up how many Pomodoros there are in each of these things. So I've got a couple little utility macros here, and then just a button that computes a sum of Pomodoros fitting a certain criterion. So basically, my goal with this tool was to make TiddlyWiki as powerful with quantitative information as it has been with qualitative information for many years. Along the way, I've found some opportunities with regular expressions to make it a little more powerful with qualitative information as well. But basically, with the sort of number crunching and text crunching you can do with these Excel-style formulas, you can build some pretty intricate and powerful things. And I'm hoping to see TiddlyWiki continue to develop in a way where some of the types of things I've presented here can be implemented with good performance, and can continue to scale up in complexity and general coolness. So that's an overview of a lot of what I've been doing. I've built a few supplementary plugins as well, which can be found in my formulas wiki, and also on the TiddlyWiki list. So that's kind of an overview, though.
Excellent. So I guess I kind of said this before, but there's a sort of immediate interest in changing the core that would simplify this experimentation. Longer conversation as we learn from the formulas plugin core in some form. In those terms, you've sent an attribute a pull request for making attribute modules into distinct attribute types into different modules, which makes a good deal of sense.
Yeah.
Are there any other pull requests coming under the umbrella of the formulas plugin?
A lot of those have to do with stuff I've discussed about performance enhancements. Yeah. Which is someplace I see a lot of potential to make TiddlyWiki faster for SVG renders, and also just for any wiki that's doing really intensive stuff with variables, or has a lot of markup inside changing variables.
Sure. Well, on the attribute modules thing, I think that is the right way to go. I only scanned the pull request so far. The little flag that went off is something feedback we often get from new users is, well, rephrased, is that they expect quotes that we have around attributes as operators so that you can nest them. The most common type of incorrect code, incorrect wiki text that I see on the group.
Sorry, you're cutting out a bit.
They're saying that the most common type of incorrect code that I see on the groups is people thinking that they can nest of attribute quotes that we have. So you'll particularly have people with double curly braces, and then within that, angle brackets for a macro implication.
Yeah.
Wondered whether this was a time to consider make that switch. Imagine that the impact it would have on this proposed change is, it means that you'd be introducing a new operator rather than a new type of quotes. But I wondered whether that was worth doing now. If we're going to delve around in this area, is, I think, a big trip up for the unwary.
So, as regards that, I do see a case for implementing, and I would describe it as string interpolation in TiddlyWiki, just because, especially under this in this hypothetical world where we're looking at making TiddlyWiki less dependent on text macros, which have been, in my assessment, a stand-in for a lot of other functionality.
I'm getting a lot of sound cutouts as well. Perhaps we should try turning cameras off.
Yeah. Okay. So we've had a little bit of discussion recently about the idea that text macros are responsible for confusion with beginners, and they're also something that TiddlyWiki is a bit over-dependent on, that has some ugly, just kind of ugly implications and side effects over the years.
To be clear, that it's the text substitution aspect of macros that's the problem.
Yeah. So,
as well. But without the text substitution.
Yeah. So right now, text substitution macros, and even if something more efficient is implemented as a replacement for macros in wiki text, macros would still remain the only way where we can, and again, the word I would use is interpolate some dynamic content into a string. And this is a place where I think we see users getting tripped up. As you mentioned, people trying to interpolate transclusions and variables into quoted strings is a common type of issue. And there are programming languages where that sort of thing is a language level feature, like PHP, where if you have an identifier with a $sign in a string, it'll actually be interpolated into it. So formulas does have ways to concatenate strings together, but I don't see formulas being necessarily a canonical solution for string interpolation, because I'm actually using formulas in some of my still other bits of code right now where I do need to glue strings like style sheet code with pieces of math together. And in the Excel-like syntax of formulas, it's still quite inelegant in my assessment.
Okay, we're still getting quite significant cutouts, Evan, which is a bit frustrating. But it sounded like you were arguing that the string substitution parts of macros can be useful for the situations where people want to triples into strings.
Well, right now, what I'm saying is they're the best tool we have. I might be able to go somewhere. where the Wi-Fi connection is a touch more reliable. I'm unfortunately at my home where our internet connection has been fritzy for some time.
I've got the worst internet.
Am I coming in clearly now?
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, it was just randomly cutting out for a few seconds at the time.
So
string interpolation. So the question was specifically, do we core mods for in terms of core mods, attribute modules that you proposed, or a solution to allow? Well, I'd say my way of putting it was slightly different, was what we currently have as operators.
Yeah, so I'll just repeat what I said before. Formulas gives a way to concatenate strings together with other entities like transclusions and variables, but it's not the most efficient or intuitive syntax for that, because it's thinking of those things as operands. And I think there is space for something that more closely resembles wiki text, but only with the features of transclusions, variables, and similar entities, as essentially something that's a how do I put it? Meant to reproduce the string interpolation functionality of macros in a more intuitive and architecturally sound way. So I guess my suggestion would be
saying you could that with text substitution and macros be done with formulas within the formula plugin for something like macros with text substitutions, but maybe a more elegant version of it.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Well, okay, just to give an example. Let's say, and this is a very simple thing
sorry, that's why I said wrong. Because it's very tricky to understand with the gaps. So was the summary that I gave that wrong? And if so, which bits were wrong?
It's not It's not quite wrong. I feel as if, yeah, it sounds like I'm cutting out, which is a shame. But I might actually be able to reset my internet connection, which may help.
It's sometimes in these situations, it's worth being on your switching off Wi-Fi and being on 4G on your phone. That's my Skype calls become intolerable.
Yeah.
Certainly here, I find 4G is often
more reliable. Well, I could certainly give that a try. But
you can do. I mean, you could do that on your phone, dial in as another person if you just mean, and mute the. So it's a non-invasive.
Yeah.
Anyway, now that we've started technology,
yeah,
it'll probably start working.
Obviously.
These things.
Obviously. So I guess what I'm getting at is formulas can do these kinds of simple glue together operations, but I think that something more useful in the long run would be a string interpolation, a sort of official string interpolation syntax that does not require a macro.
I think this is getting into a space where I was seeing slightly differently. But I think it comes to the same thing. The string interpolation engine. What I would like to get to is the point wiki text can be used as the value of an attribute.
Yes.
Yes. It's a very good way to do what you're pulling in.
Wiki text syntax or a reduced set of parse
I
rules.
was thinking full wiki text syntax actually. Lists, widgets, and everything, and so that basically the area I've been wanting to explore is the idea that be represented by a widget tree, and when we need the value of that attribute, that widget tree, and either get the text content or the HTML content, depending on the function that has been specified for the operation.
Okay. Yeah.
That seems. I think that's the same thing, basically. And so, look, just pull back for a second, because the reason why this is a conversation between you and me is this sort of the tension between the core. Kind of the core needs big jumps of functionality. It's not worth paying the cost of large-scale, backwards incompatible changes unless those changes really pay off. And I think a lot of what we're discussing here, therefore, is about that. It's about TWX, and I just outlined of doing attributes that way. The kind of thing we should be thinking about in that kind of context. As far as the core is concerned, that is.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. I think what I said before, what I mentioned before, that is exactly the type of innovation that's difficult to do in plugins, and we need to make sure that it's. I'm much taken with the idea that somebody seeing the work that you're doing here might say, if only it was Lisp, or if only it was Forth, or if only it was something else.
Yeah.
We might, this isn't just about Excel, useful though that is, but as a nod to TiddlyWiki's potential universality, it's back to something I say regularly about TiddlyWiki's aspiration to be a universal notation system, a place where you can notations for specific tasks.
Yeah.
So,
yes,
that interjection was kind of me trying to keep things on track, but I can't stop meandering.
Well, so you brought up some really valuable. Well, yeah, complete your thought, but I've definitely got to say
that I feel like we need to have different colored backgrounds if this was a real in order to distinguish between the two areas of focus, and I'm jumping between them a little bit too much. But should we dive into the attribute modules? I've got the
I have a segue. So you mentioned the idea that that attributes in some far off and fanciful enhancement of TiddlyWiki could behave essentially as widget trees. And I actually think that's a very natural direction of thinking. TiddlyWiki already has things like the empty message and the actions attribute on some triggering widgets like button and checkbox, which are essentially kind of hacks for places where you can have attributes that contain widget code. I also think that as far as
discussed action widgets before, but just to set the stage for that, I regard action widgets as a dismal failure, and there are really two different versions of action widgets that in the core at the moment. There's the version where the action widget side the parent widget that triggers them, and there's the one where we put a sequence of action widgets and an attribute.
Yeah, so I've actually been getting a lot more.
Second, I was going to say the first was a bad idea, and the second, that bad idea by making it worse, is my feeling at the moment. So I think anything that in TWX terms that abandons that isn't necessarily a problem.
Yeah. So, but. Anyway, just touching on those as examples, and I did get a lot more familiar with action widgets last night because I was building that timer thing that I was mentioning, a timer that triggers action widgets at a specific timer after intervals. And I'm actually doing that so that I can build simple simulations and things like self-organizing maps with my formula plugin. But anyway,
I misunderstood. In fact, can we sidetrack ourselves, because I'd misunderstood in my reply to that post to trigger action widgets at a specified time interval. And the way I do that in other projects, really fun, is just injecting tiddlers according to a timeline. So you think of, so you have a daemon that that adds and removes tiddlers according to kind version of the JSON file, a bundle of tiddlers where each of them.
The use case for the timer widget, I guess I don't want to tangentialize on this too much, but the use case for the timer widget is like an explorable explanation that involves a simple simulation where current state
I understand
needs to be
that, and I'm saying that I'm suggesting that the one step of indirection, that what your timer does and all it does is change the value of tiddlers at specific time intervals, and that you make everything else that the explorable needs to do triggered off of those changes. So we do more useful, we need ways to during an action widget in response to another tiddler having changed its value, something along those lines. But maybe
that's a slightly more tangential thing that maybe we can discuss towards the end.
It gets quite critical if you're talking about explorables, because reactive system, as you pointed out before, and its entire state is the tiddler store. And so if you want the state of the system to change over time, the way to accomplish that is to change the state of the store. So in terms of
that is actually how the timer widget I implemented does in the general case depend on changes to the tiddler store, and that's something I recognize as the proper way of operating TiddlyWiki. I've seen other things that involve rotatable.
The other element that's a slight red flag is set timers. Enough that we let widgets set event handlers because we don't properly clean up those event handlers.
So right now my prototype
really tricky.
My prototype implementation does set a timer, and I recognize the architectural problems with that. So right now the way I maintain consistency and avoid bugs when it's rapidly getting refreshed or rebuilt is I have it I actually have the widget, when the timer goes off, it crawls all the way up the widget tree to the root widget and sees if it's still in the widget tree and not about to be garbage collected.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that was after trying to
and
implement a DOM node removal handler and a bunch of other stuff. But that was a whole wild goose chase last night. What I want to get back to the kind of back onto our thread here, though. TiddlyWiki has been pushing, in my mind, with things like empty message and with things like the action widget list towards having widgets, or at least widget-like entities, be able to live in attributes. I also look at widgets as essentially computation nodes in the functional language or functional programming system that is TiddlyWiki, and they're nodes whose output is an HTML document object model, and whose inputs are attribute values and their content. But you could almost look at attribute values and content as being similar entities if you start to look at how these things are trying to push in similar directions, or how certain items, the list widget, basically it wants multiple bodies. It wants a body for its empty message, and it wants a body for its list template. I made the if-else widget, which is using a really uncouth hack to do what it does, but it's essentially a hack that allows a widget to have multiple bodies. If, else, else if, else if. And as a result,
but
which
we know
can
how
do something.
HTML handles
that. How HTML handles multiple bodies? Well, it just adds more elements.
It would require sub elements. And I think in retrospect, I think that's what the list widget should have done. It should have said, if the first child is a list body, then a empty portion or something after it, another widget after it. But if it's not, then assume that that's just the insides of it. So be equivalent to the T body element in a, be implied most of the time if you wanted to specify the message.
Yeah. So are you talking about it being another element that comes after the list widget, or inside of it?
Inside of it.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I was actually playing with the idea of a switch case widget that would work a little bit like that. But I guess it's my observation that the widget tree, it's currently made to imitate a DOM, but so the thing is, the attribute module's pull request, and this was the nature of my segue here. The attribute module's pull request introduces objects that look a lot like stripped down widgets. I've even implemented basically a compute and a refresh method for them. The refresh method isn't used yet, but both those methods are there, and those are basic methods that widgets use. They also need a pointer to a widget to operate so that they can get access to all the handy widget functionality, like getting variables and accessing the tiddler store. So my attribute module's pull request essentially introduces an entity, which I've played with calling it a gizmo just by extension, but it's a lot like a widget. It's just more stripped down. And I think that, you know, between that and my examination of these widgets that kind of want additional content bodies, I'm just seeing just a general convergence in the way that technology wants to seems to want to push.
I mean, Evan, I mean, what this suggests to me is I think that those bits to do with widget, with attribute refresh, a bit speculative at the moment. I'm not sure that belongs in the core at this point. Feel that we're
sorry, you're cutting out a bit. Could you repeat yourself?
I see. I'm saying I see two things in this pull request. There's the thing of introducing the attribute rule module type, the attribute refresh enhancements that you mentioned.
Yes.
and it feels like the first is a slam dunk. That's easy, you know. In terms of the core, anything that could be spun off into separate modules probably should be. There's a few places where things like this aren't. It makes things replace that. It's a pretty straightforward proposition. But the refresh stuff seems more speculative, and particularly the seems more speculative. And I wondered if it's worth putting the pull request into doing the controversial bit in a separate pull request.
And so just to be clear about that, the methods I've implemented for selective refresh, they don't actually get called. They're things I threw in there
but
because
look,
they're
the pull request is the idea of a gizmo, so it increases the cognitive load of learning the core. And what I'm proposing is that we shouldn't introduce a new concept, and particularly a new entity type, until we're absolutely needed. TiddlyWiki tries desperately to reuse the kinds of different things, and we're both thinking that this should be a reuse of widgets, so therefore I think it makes sense to introduce this speculative change at the if what I said was right. I mean, correct me if any of those steps are wrong.
So I guess on that note, if I don't think it would be unreasonable to replace to actually use widget for attribute modules. The is just wrangling them and making sure parsing and refresh work correctly, which you know, again,
but so is this. But so is this. I mean, we don't know which. You know, you've got a proposal here.
Well, I mean, what I've introduced are basically
reduced
widgets,
and so we don't want to merge this gizmo stuff at this point while that discussion is going on. So
yeah, no, that makes as long as there's a way to properly instantiate these attribute widgets and properly manage them and such. And you know, I wrote this thing up and I realized what I was basically making was a widget with less functionality than widget. So that's an absolutely valid criticism.
Understood. But I think what you've but look, you jumping all the way back, for the formulas plugin was enabling the mushroom syntax. And what we're trying, you've already got that. The formulas plugin already has that, but it's brittle. And then allow the formulas plugin to flourish and other. And if you, well, I'm sorry, I'm just restating.
Sorry, I've missed your last sentence or two.
Just restating the argument for pulling out the non-controversial bits. And so the non-controversial bits would be the minimum modification to get the handling each type of attribute quotes into a different module. And ideally, we would do it without introducing any new conceptual entities, because there already is the idea of an attribute in the system. And so I wouldn't mind seeing attribute.js appear as a that collects together stuff as attributes. That would be fine in Gizmo or any other new concepts.
Yeah, well, the tricky thing then is how I patch that through to my formula evaluator, because there still needs to be some kind of module for executing the formula when it appears as an attribute, unless you're talking about making that into the core.
Okay. So, well, I mean, I can restate this a different way. That if you need a pull request to make life easier for the formula plugin, that pull request doesn't reflect any in the plugin at the moment, because the whole thing is that the experimentation is happening out. The experiment
you cut out once more.
bad for you might be.
All right. I might try connecting to my cell phone internet here.
Evan?
Yes.
How much?
Yeah, I have my cell phone here now. I might try connecting through that. Yeah, I might go offline for just a moment here.
Okay, all right. You try again.
I'm getting the dropout too, though, so that suggests it's.
Dropout to what, Eric?
Oh, no, I'm just saying I'm getting dropouts from you as well.
Dropout. Oh yeah, so it's not just me. Good. Eric, isn't this fun though? This is the type of stuff that we've dreamt about and not.
It reminds me very much of stuff that you and I did 10 years ago in terms of trying to push the boundaries of what TiddlyWiki was capable of, but staying within the framework of what had been set up for Classic.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the way a bit of the forEachTiddler yours. The forEachTiddler plugin in Classic was brought in a really important board didn't the way the caught it, or certainly not in the form that it was shipped. And so it ended up being an integral part of TiddlyWiki Classic, I think, for many, many users. The formula is the same, that Evan's got it to a point where it's useful and it does everything that be made more useful. This question of how much stuff can you take each Tiddler plugin, you then realize that if you're going to read formula plugin, and so in a way, the TiddlyWiki 5, because TiddlyWiki 5 was an attempt to do the things that previously had required the forEachTiddler plugin. It kind of leads to TiddlyWiki X in the same way. Makes proposed here. Once you've seen how valuable it is, eventually a rewrite in order to gain that capability.
I hear footsteps.
Ben.
That's just me moving around to places where the cell phone might receive better. Was Jeremy still cutting out for you a little there, Eric?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, he was cutting out for me quite a lot.
So
Is someone running the microwave, Jeremy? Am I coming through?
Oh, you were cutting out just then.
Just now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff. The wonders of technology.
So I just, I don't know how much of it you heard, but
I got a gist.
Okay. I mean,
you're talking about the idea that the formulas plugin is pushing the limits of TiddlyWiki 5 the way that the forEachTiddler plugin was pushing the limits of TiddlyWiki Classic, and how that might relate to
that was just
the TWX transition.
Me filling it in the gap. The bit I was talking about when I was cutting out was where I think something has really helped me to understand what's going on, and it's making me realize the beginning that I said was how wonderful it is to see this experimentation happening in a plugin, because you and every touch plugin, you're not the core, you're not held back by the core. You have both been able to and produce innovations at a tremendous. And that's the whole point of the plugin architecture of open source projects that only have theme, is that it enables innovation to be distributed because there's no burden to the core of all of the innovation that's happening around the edges of the project. And what I was beginning to see,
there have only really been a few places where I've had any kind of roadblocks with the core. So on that level, great job.
Yeah.
Because I've been able to go in, most of the things I've built have been built by looking at core widgets and parse rules and things and going in and modifying them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, I mean, at every level, the stuff that you do is very ish, both from the way that you've got filters within your formula syntax approach to implementation, yeah, so totally, I can see you doing that. But look, I just mean about this one pull request, and it's, I'm still talking around what would make a good replacement, and it's this idea of the uncontroversial piece. And I got excited about when I was last talking that you couldn't be realizing that if we let the experimentation that you're doing leak into the core, for both parties, it's bad for you because it suddenly means that some of the stuff you're working with isn't under your control because it's gone into the core, and it's bad for the core if it turns out to be the wrong thing. So I'm really, this is a motherhood and apple pie statement, but I'm really clarifying to myself what the criteria are for what the good bits of this pull request are, the non-speculative bits. So with that, we probably covered that more than enough, Evan. Thank you for your patience with that. And if you're happy to...
just as a closing word on the pull request, I think you're on the money when you suggest that where that functionality wants to go is it's just a widget as an attribute. I think that's the most natural thing in the world for TiddlyWiki, and the reason I think that is I think of an attribute as a function in a functional programming, or sorry, I think of a widget as a function in the functional programming system that is TiddlyWiki, and the parameters to that function are other widgets, or are basically sets of child widgets. And those parameters are the content and the attributes.
I think we both are seeing the widget tree as being equivalent to a sort of upside down version of the stack that you maintain while you do a conventional expression, evaluate an expression. Pretty much what's going on. It's just that we have a fancy.
Yeah, I think in a little bit more of like I might be thinking in a little bit more of like a computation graph mindset, and that's just because I've programmed a data flow language before.
Likewise,
data flow,
it would be interesting to talk about the action widgets, but that cropped up there. I'd be interested in your thoughts about a better replacement.
I could certainly
issues with the current system. But before we go into that, we've kind of covered replacing macros, and we've talked about the selective refresh stuff. What did you mean by relationship management?
The selective refresh mechanism does go a little broader. That topic does go a little broader than just attributes, but honestly, it's pretty easy to summarize. I think we should have selective refresh for variables in addition to tiddlers.
Back against the selective refresh stuff. I'm merely want to separate it out from the attribute modules. I'd make about
absolutely. It's a different feature.
I think you already know, really, that for one of the limitations with the current refresh mechanism is that because there's no bloody decent test rig for it, it's incredibly difficult to change it. Worse. And so I think
Yeah.
if we're going to go down that route, I think it'll be a good, we need to have some decent test rigs for performance and know that I would find it to merge a pull request the claim to make improvements to any kind of complex improvements along the lines that you're talking about going to need to be fleshed out in that way. But I think that
improving selective refresh is a big job with a lot of heavy stuff within it. I have gone through things and I've seen a lot of potential to make TiddlyWiki much faster.
Even with our current test framework, we could make life a lot easier for ourselves in making those changes.
Yeah. But anyway, setting that aside, you were asking about relationship management. I can summarize that pretty easily. So TiddlyWiki has some built-in fields for relationships that get a bit of special treatment. These are the tags and list fields. Now, actually, that special treatment in the core isn't really the bigger part of the issue, though it's certainly something. But basically, these fields are made to be lists of tiddlers to which the current tiddler is related. And as a matter of convention, tags and lists are often treated as a bidirectional relationship where a category tiddler will list a number of element tiddlers, and often, not always, those element tiddlers will also tag the category tiddler. What I'm interested in for TiddlyWiki moving forward is more on a UI level, the idea that you have some fields in a tiddler, and this might be dependent on some annotation about what sort of tiddler it is, but you have some fields that TiddlyWiki recognizes as being relationship fields, and for which it displays a UI for managing a list of the tiddlers referenced by the relationship or a single other tiddler, which would essentially, it would look a lot like the tag editor, or it would look like a dropdown. I also think there's potentially some utility in having the editor manage bidirectional consistency, a bit like what it does when you rename a tiddler. It'll go through tags and list fields and make sure the tiddler gets renamed in those locations as well. If there's a broader concept of relationships in TiddlyWiki, that mechanism could be extended to maintain consistency of all relationship fields in the wiki. And potentially you could also implement something like a bidirectional relationship where if it's edited on one side, it's edited on the other side. But basically, I think relationship fields are really useful. I think maintaining consistent relationships is something that can be a lot of housekeeping, but TiddlyWiki is already taking the steps towards automating those. Just currently, those are limited to some privileged built-in relationships. And there are use cases where you need more than just tags to maintain all the things that are related to like a character or something like that. So,
okay, indeed. There's some history here that embodies or includes two different attempts to apply metadata to tiddler fields. Tiddler field modules, JavaScript modules, which are used to give the tags field behavior. And then there's a bunch in user land, there's a bunch of configuration tiddlers determine which editor should be used and type. And my strong feeling is now that the metadata to tiddlers was wrong. It was a mistake, and it's a mistake because it makes it impossible to merge two wikis that have metadata information about a particular field. It's yeah. So I've come to believe that that was a mistake. It's the reason why in TWX we've got this rethinking of what a tiddler is, and that re-engineering the tiddler. All tiddler fields behave the same way,
Yeah.
in the core of the list or tags fields. However, would satisfy what you're asking for here, which is the ability to automatically recognize reference to another tiddler and to renumber it when we hit it. So yes, I think there's a you're expressing there that I share and I'm very interested in. Conflicts with it conflicts with my experience of how we approach that in TiddlyWiki 5, if I can put it that way. So what the sort of thing I've wondered about was basically elsewhere I've talked about TiddlyWiki X. There is a bundle of fields. You can have multiple fields with the same name.
Mm-hmm.
If you have multiple fields with the same name, that's equivalent to a list, or the value of that one field being a list. I've explored the idea that the values be typed, and so that one of the types is a link, is the name of another tiddler. They're considered pulling references out to be indirect in that way. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff we should be thinking about. It's a fascinating area.
Yeah, so I've come across some sort of I've been working with some other architectures lately, and a theme I've come across that might be useful for purposes of this decision is that often there is a need to, even if there isn't really a need for strong type delineation along other axes, like delineating delineating lists or individual items, or delineating numbers and text. It's often pretty unavoidable that there is a need to delineate relational and non-relational data. Implications for handling relational data tend to be very different. So I guess if the idea I want to plant in your head is that field would be like a pointer or a set of pointers, and under the hood that could be text or whatever, but it's a pretty different cup of tea than really any other kind of field, regardless of what data is encapsulated, because relationships relationships
that approach. And I guess with another approach to think about that conflicts, which is why I think this is an interesting area, is that there are ways to do it. And that's that I think in some cases, at the moment we model links as being relationships, as being decorations on one or other of the two tiddlers involved in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Relationships as separate tiddlers.
You mean links as in links in wiki text?
No, the relation. So the fact we could have a tiddler that's the tag and a tiddler that's the tag empty. Sorry, a tiddler that is empty, that says empty tagged with work.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's using the tag example rather than the link example. But and you can see what I've done there is that we've what to me we're doing here is moving around the floor. So the floor is primitives that we choose to recognize as such, and we can kind of move the floor down a bit by making those, or up a bit by making those primitives a bit more complicated, or we can move the floor down but build more stuff on top of the floor. And I guess when I think about that tension, observation I'd make based on my experience, particularly with TiddlyWiki 5, is that how I've felt I've resisted the proliferation of tiddlers because it's felt messy and expensive. The tiddlers has often to be both elegant and practical as a solution to things. Because you see where I'm going, is that by a new a tiddler to represent the relationship, reuse the complexity we've already got rather than introducing a new type of complexity.
So I definitely see your line of reasoning with introducing the concept of typed fields as something that threatens to sort of challenge the integrity of TiddlyWiki as something you can the ability to merge different wikis, because essentially you'd have these global settings that might conflict and be a mess. But I guess what I want to go back to is, again, the idea that there is special functionality afforded to these kind of multi-purpose relationships in TiddlyWiki right now, tags, which are very useful. They just break down in certain use cases where you need to know who somebody's mother and father are and what events they've been associated in. And recently, I've been working with architectures like the JSON API, which is it's a method for it's basically an extension of the REST API that's a particular set of rules you follow to present a bunch of information via JSON data as a big flat store of objects categorized by type. And one of the basic things it does, it's sort of basic architectural decisions to distinguish it from other things, are that, like TiddlyWiki, everything is in a flat store. And then when you're inspecting the structure of an object, it has separate areas for all of its relationships to other objects, resources properly, they're called. Relationships from the resource to other resources, and for the attributes of the resource, which are non-relational. So as this applies to TiddlyWiki, I guess it's genuinely hard to make a case for having a global setting that makes certain fields special. So I guess I almost want to.
But on the other hand, we have already got that in TiddlyWiki 5.
Yeah.
I mean, another angle is I wonder how much of the ideas you're exploring here you could actually expect that, because it's quite interesting to see. I mean, part of the reason why it's not been successful is because we didn't really embrace it and run with it. Kind of could have.
So just for reference, I'm going to mention a few more details of how JSON API does what it does. So within the resource object, which is a JSON representation of the resource that you get in a query or that you send back as a patch, there are a couple of basic branches. In the data branch.
By the way, let's because I'm looking at an example that's probably helpful for other people to.
Oh yeah, you know what? I'll screen share it. So
I'm screen sharing it. No.
Sharing it might have a little more bandwidth than I do. Screen sharing.
I've stopped now. Go on.
Oh, okay. All right. I've got this wonderful cell phone internet thing going on. Yeah, when you pull up JSON API, one of the first things you get is dump of some JSON API information. So here is this whole thing is like the result of a JSON API query. This is the data part. And inside the data part, there's one object. The object has a unique identifier, much like a tiddler does, which in JSON API is composed of a type and an ID. Then it has a few other elements describing the object. For our purposes, the only ones we're going to care about are and relationships. Attributes are basically the fields that are set on the object. Relationships are the way and I should say resource, just to be consistent with the terminology. Relationships are the relationships from this particular resource, which is an article, article number 1, resources. And these are, there aren't any other fields per se, other than those which go into attributes and relationships in JSON API. And actually, you can't have a relationship with the same field as an attribute, which is meant as a way to guarantee that implementers are safe to put those in the same structure on their end. But relationships are treated as this completely different branch because the kind of management that's necessary for them is different. There's this concept of a flat store with interrelated objects, and I mean, I guess JSON API could have made it so that relationships were just like the type and a slash and the ID, but the fact of the matter is you need to be able to know what is a relationship and what isn't for any given object. As far as like, and this does feel very much like a TiddlyWiki X discussion rather than a TiddlyWiki 5 discussion, but this sort of strict delineation here makes a lot of sense to me as something that could be embraced by TiddlyWiki architecture, maybe even by making relationships entirely separate from fields, which is a pretty wild idea. But
I think the thing that makes me think is that here there's two things here. There's JSON. There's a specification of JSON, which is a small, well-defined set of primitives that work
and this
together
isn't
harmoniously. And then you're showing me the JSON API on top. I think TiddlyWiki's role is to be equivalent to JSON. It's to be a substrate that people can explore a variety of ways of expressing relationships like this. And so if you're going towards adopt a way similar to this for expressing relationships between tiddlers and fields, no, that should be in userland space and not in the core. I would like to make sure that the core was very good at supporting those cases. So where people are building these types of more complicated relationship structures out of tiddlers, to use them as easily as we use tags and so on today.
And I mean, honestly, I think the most essential features as far as that goes are just the UI for editing them and the function that where if a tiddler is renamed, its relationships get updated. Because right now, whenever I need to do that, I have to open up a dummy tiddler and write a bunch of button code to do a mass refactor.
Right, but I mean, so I mean, following the thoughts here, what that means to me is that we've got at the moment by which when you rename a title, you get the option of renumbering those other things. That mechanism needs to be extensible, so that if anybody was working with a TiddlyWiki that embodied a TiddlyWiki version of this schema that you see here, and be able to extend that.
one other remark I will make, and this is very much a remark in the context of TiddlyWiki X, is that especially if we're talking about these sort of dynamically configurable tiddler stores, there is the possibility that information other than just a title may be necessary to model a relationship in a future TiddlyWiki X context. You might even have something wild like a relationship to remote tiddler, or a relationship to something with a GUID that needs to be looked up.
Well, a couple of observations.
In context like that, you could see
everything has unique titles, it's not addressable. So, you know, if things don't have unique titles, then you'd have to pack them in somehow. One of the great things about GUIDs is that they're guaranteed to be unique. So you can just slap a GUID field on tiddlers and treat it as if it was unique. They immediately want to store GUIDs in the title field. So literally, to me, the point of GUIDs is that you can treat them as if they were a unique primary key without them actually being one. So I don't see much. I think TiddlyWiki is as primitive as it gets here. Its requirement is that there be a string of bytes that identifies tiddler, that uniquely identifies the tiddler, and I don't think we can get more primitive than that.
Yeah. I guess I'm just thinking about use cases where it might be necessary to refer to a shadow tiddler or to a tiddler in another wiki that can be dynamically loaded by the current wiki but hasn't yet. And so there might need to be information about how that wiki could be loaded or crazy stuff like that. But that's all far future stuff. So.
Well, no, it's all interesting stuff. And one thought about TiddlyWiki is this sort of when it's a bounded thing, and your perspective is very different when you're inside it or outside of it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Having the means of control being outside, I think you've said you've done data flows, so you must see it like this, is incredibly useful. And now I think we should draw to a close. Let's turn on the cameras and then suck up any in audio that it gives us. Presumably you're going to be on 2006, your phone there, because I think they try and, yeah. But Evan, look, it was a great discussion in terms of, I'm very pleased. It's a discussion that's grounded in what we can do today with TiddlyWiki, and that's the best sort of discussion to be having. But of course, TiddlyWiki discussions as well, and it's genuinely, it's only in the last few months that I've been ideas because I was terrified of kind of premature discussion of those topics. But I'm really pleased that it's resonating with you, and it takes, as you know, a very long-term view with TiddlyWiki, and TiddlyWiki X is something for the future. It's not going to be that far into the future, and I hope that we'll all still be sitting around discussing TiddlyWiki X when that starts, with all the experience gained by the terrific that you're doing now. So thank you was what that meant. And Eric, I'm so sorry that our discussion has left you speechless. So that's a great shame.
I've been listening carefully, and it reminds me very much again of the kind of discussions that you and I had, 10 years ago about ways in which to push the limits on TiddlyWiki Classic. And it's nice to see that there's somebody like Evan who is sort of picking up some of that. Now that I've gotten old and decrepit, and it's good to see somebody with a lot of vigor and energy digging into the ugly innards of things. One thing that I don't know if it has any bearing on the discussion about JSON, but I have a plugin that I wrote which fetches JSON from a remote source and then decomposes it into tiddlers. I think I showed that to you a while ago.
Eric showed me. Eric showed me this plugin, and weirdly, at about the same time, plugin, or essentially the same plugin. So yes, we need to both. I haven't published my JSON stuff, and I must do so.
Right, but it basically walks the JSON object recursively and creates tiddlers with slashes as a path.
Yeah.
There was another user talking about making a core modification for accessing subpaths in JSON tiddlers. That was actually part of what is slightly tangential, but that was part of what inspired me to suggest a mechanism for plugins that patch shadow tiddlers, which I know you were a little concerned about maintainability there.
Sorry, the patch tiddlers. Oh yeah, no, it's a lovely idea to think about, and easier than Git.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it just seems like a way that developers like me or this other fellow could
I know.
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's how developers think. It's not how people responsible for support think. So I've seen how all the time, all three of us on this call, we will build stuff that we recognize to be dangerous. You know, we build stuff for some situations where you have to be careful. Over and over again, I see people. If you put that stuff out there and you make it too easy to yourself in the foot, great machine for shooting yourself in the foot.
yeah. No, I recognize that. That's why I keep. I'm increasingly moving towards using more TiddlyWiki folders than files, and keeping everything on Dropbox, where there's this obsessive version history.
That's interesting. Well, I'm hoping this year, lots of us are coming together. You're one of a handful of people who've been very productive recently, like Thomas, Burning Tree. Don't know what Burning Tree is.
I only just looked at Murray Touch, and it's really, really cool.
It's amazing. Absolutely.
Actually, when I looked at Murray Touch, I was over at a friend's house, and I'd been giving them a huge spiel about TiddlyWiki and computational note-taking and making like interactive mathematical models solely for your own use. And friend's big into VR. He put on his VR headset and play around with virtual desktop, which simulates multi-touch. And I was just on TiddlyWiki, and I pulled up Murray Touch, and then I was like, whoa.
Well, that I'd like to see a video of if you're at your friend's house again. I'm sure that's good.
Yeah, it was. That was fun.
So look, I must draw to a close, but I am emboldened by the hangouts of the year. I'd like to try and hold them more regularly. That we flag this as a developer hangout. In the past, we've had hangouts that are kind of this being for general interest, and then people have sometimes found them a bit too technical. So it's been quite nice to be able to feel that we can have a joyful technical discussion without worrying about how dull it is for everybody else. Very much for your time. I'm going to stop the broadcast now after I've said, again, thanks to you. Thank you very much to the moment, but there'll be no doubt a few dozen viewing on YouTube in the future. But thank you all for joining me. It's a great discussion. Evan, thanks again. Eric, many thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.
Pleasure as always.